Hey, Noah.
Hey, man, it's been a long time.
It's been ages.
Yeah.
So let's see. This is your show. You tell me how you'd like to proceed.
This is not like comics kayfabe where they go through like the whole career and all that stuff.
Oh, we're just going to talk, right?
Yeah, I just chat. I just have casual comics chats. Last night I had Bob Fingerman on.
Yeah, no, Bob.
I never met him before. It was so weird. He has a new book coming out from Heavy Metal, and so we were just kind of getting to know each other as it was being recorded. So it was kind of interesting.
Oh, cool. Yeah, cool. Bob's a good guy. I haven't seen him in years, but we used to see each other at the shows, and I loved this comic that Fantagraphics was publishing back in the old days. So.
Yeah, Minimum Wage.
Yeah, Minimum Wage. That was the one.
You worked at Heavy Metal, didn't you?
I was one of the first Americans published at Heavy Metal.
All right, I'm sorry.
1977. We can start there if you want, but
okay, yeah.
We don't have to.
No, I was just going to ask what stories you were doing in Heavy Metal at the time. This is before Swamp Thing, right?
Yeah. This is when I was still at the Kubert School. It was one of my first freelance sales. I mean, a lot of us were doing work program stuff for Joe Kubert, but I would put my portfolio together and go into New York, I'd say every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, and try to drum up work. And I got my foot in the door with John Workman, who was the art director at Heavy Metal. Showed him my folio, and he liked it. And I sold him a one-pager. I kept selling him like one-pagers. I finally was able to sell them on, I can't call it a story, Noah. It was sort of, we figured out early on that Heavy Metal wouldn't buy anything that made linear sense. So I sold them this piece called Curious Thing, which I think was in October 1978 issue. And that was probably the longest thing I did, other than, the 1941 graphic novel. Rick Veitch and I did that for Heavy Metal. That was our big Heavy Metal thing. It was a complete commercial failure when it came out, The movie had high expectations, so people, I guess the sales on it were strong before the movie came out. And then once the movie came out, it was really sobering, Noah, to have our friends telling us that whole year, like, you guys are made, you got it made, you're working with Steven Spielberg. And then, like, I don't know, a month, 6 weeks after the book came out, I see it on a remainder table at a bookstore, and it's like, oh, how fleeting.
Yeah. Well, you don't get royalties from a remainder book, do you? Well, it seems like you still keep up with things that are coming out all the time. Like, I mean, you're probably more in tune with what's going on with Young Cartoonists than I am. I don't even really know. It seems like it's so much.
Well, it's actually pretty impossible to keep up now. I mean, so much of it's happening on crowdfunding and Kickstarter, and I guess. Early on with that stuff, I would try to keep track of some of it, but who can max out their credit card that far? It's like you would be, maxing out your credit card every month trying to keep up with what's being crowdfunded. So, no, I try to, my reading habits are going to change in the coming year because I just retired.
I know. I'll talk to you about that.
And so much of my reading was shaped by, what should I be reading to prepare for this year's, curriculum? What should I be reading to prepare for this year's class? And also, much of my diet, as you know, from your year at CCS, is just reading the students' work. People thought I was being facetious when they would ask me, what's the best new comics you're reading? I'd say, CCS work. Because it was true each year. That's what shaped a lot of my reading. Or it would also shape my reading by students would turn me on to cartoonists I hadn't heard of.
Yeah.
So I would clear some time, clear some money, track down sample or key works by certain creators that have been mentioned in class or to me by students. So my reading habits are going to change over the next year or so because I just won't have that constant dietary input, if you will.
So you're gonna stay away from the school. You're not really gonna be going over there and doing anything anymore. I mean, it's done.
COVID-19, baby. We've all reconfigured our lives. I still go up to CCS every week, but I go up there like 5:36 in the morning, do my photocopying, and get out. And I have to say, I mean, we did finish what turned out to be my last semester. We were doing all the classes online, Noah. So already, I would say, as of the March break that we always take, that's when everything shifted. It was just like, one manner of living that we had been doing for 15 years ended, and a whole new way of interacting at CCS was started. And it'll be interesting to see where that goes. I've already been invited to speak at one of the summer sessions, that Kane and John were co-teaching. Kane Lynch and John Chad were co-teaching. So that'll probably be part of my involvement with CCS, is occasionally doing a guest lecture or something, which is pretty much what I'm doing with you right now, Noah. I get on a laptop and talk about what have you. So
yeah. So the COVID thing really messed up this last year, huh? Just like
it messed it up emotionally. I think most people got their work. I mean, there weren't any major changes in terms of how many got their final project done, how many got their thesis project done. Our seeing through the process of critiquing final projects for the freshmen and doing thesis review for the seniors. We just had to do it online using Zoom or Google Hangouts, where you could have multiple people. So we didn't really feel the change that way, but yeah, I think it's going to change everything as of this fall. I think the real reinvention, not just for the Center for Cartoon Studies, but for every kind of learning institution probably in the world, it's really being reconfigured right now, and who knows what shape that's going to take.
When you got married, did you have like a big party, or did you keep it small?
We kept them small. I've been married twice in my life. My first marriage was in a cow pasture in Grafton, Vermont, and we were wed by the local justice of the peace, who was our landlord. And when Marge and I got married, we did it as a small affair, catered by a local Italian restaurant that we really loved, and just did it as a pretty intimate gathering. I think we had like 20 people. With
any comic artists there?
Rick Veitch.
Ah, there you go. Yeah.
Nice check. They were our closest friends that were at the ceremony. I mean, Rick and I go back to 1976. We met in the fall of '76. So yeah, so Rick was there, but most of my other cartooning friends weren't there. We kept it down to family and geographically close friends.
Hey, one of the things that I think about a lot was when you told me about how you lived in a schoolhouse.
Oh yeah.
I think about that all the time. It was like a one-room old schoolhouse in Vermont, right?
Yeah, it was a one-room brick schoolhouse in Grafton, Vermont, on Fisher Hill Road. The structure is still there. If anyone is so diehard that they want to go and take a look at it, if you get on Fisher Hill Road in Grafton, Vermont, from the Grafton side, it's less than a mile up that dirt road on the left. It was a one-room brick schoolhouse that had the year 1863 in metal letters on the top of it. So it was built at the end of the 19th century. And apparently the first tenant there, after it was no longer a schoolhouse, was the school teacher who had taught there, the woman who had taught there. And I got a funny story about that. Yeah. One of the things, it was a one-room schoolhouse, Noah. It was like there were no walls or partitions. It was one big room. I had my wood stove in one corner. I had my drawing table close enough to wood stove to be warm, not so close that it would, be a fire hazard. Bed was on the other end with kind of a blanket cordoned up on the wall, so there was a little bit of an artificial wall there. And there was no running water and no electricity when I moved in. But you could see on the walls, it was like that old sort of slat woodwork that you see on 19th century houses and structures. And you could see where the chalkboards used to be. They had been taken down, but you you could tell where those chalkboard fixtures had been.
Wow.
And I had a friend who I will not name because there is a comics association there, and I don't know if they want this story told, but I had a friend who came and stayed for a weekend. They were going to spend 3 nights. And the first night they were there was an incredible lightning storm, rain and lightning storm. And I still love lightning storms. I slept through it like a baby. But the next morning, when we got up after breakfast, they packed up. And I said, what's going on? And they said, during that lightning storm, every time there was a flash of lightning, they told me, they would see the chalkboards on the wall.
Oh!
Right? And there was one long bolt of lightning, and they said they saw a pair of hands with a ruler doing this.
No!
And I was like, what? What are you saying? Like, I had been living there by that time almost a year, 9 months, something like that. I'd never had anything like that. But they split. They were afraid. And I didn't. So, I just thought it was kind of, well, that was weird. And then a couple of months later, summer had come. A couple of months later, these cars used to pull up into the driveway, Noah, to take pictures of the schoolhouse. And I got into the habit of going up to the doorway because in that day, the kind of cameras most people had were those Polaroids where they would like pull the film out and then they would just like drop the garbage, on my driveway and take off. So I got in the habit of going to the door frame just to say hi and to ask them, please don't drop your garbage here. I live here.
Yeah.
And it was this car that drove up and it was 2 young guys. I was in my 20s and they were around the same age. And one of them got out and I went up to the door to say hi. And the guy was really friendly. He said, I lived here for a couple months. Is it okay if I just, look around? I really like it here. And I said, sure. And, your friend can come in too if they want. And he went, oh, no, he's not going to come in. And I was like, something the matter? And he's like, he used to see ghosts here. So I guess for some people,
yeah,
that place had something in it, but it was a great place to live. And that's where I did.
Certainly.
That's where I did the story Cults that was in Epic Illustrated #6. And that's where I did I did a lot of comics work there. And it was a great place to live and work. And that's where I finished 1941. The reason I moved there was Rick Veitch and I got the job with Heavy Metal to do the graphic novel of 1941. And so Rick already had a place on the other side of Grafton, Vermont. He found me the brick schoolhouse, and we would bicycle back and forth.
But it had no electricity, so you just have to have candles or something?
Car battery. I had 2 car batteries I would hook my drawing lamp up to. And of course, you run out of juice. I would have to charge them up every day or so. And that was frustrating. I mean, I could work until 1:30 in the morning before the juice would run out. And I finally got electricity in, but I got electricity in not because of the drawing light. I got electricity in because I couldn't keep my food refrigerated. I ended up in this battle with raccoons. The way I would refrigerate my food when I had no electricity is there was a big brook outside the house, and the water was really cold all summer long. So I would put all my refrigeratables into big glass jars and submerge them into the water. And the raccoons they could open anything, right? And it turned into this constant battle of trying to figure out containers I could put in the brook that the raccoons wouldn't get. And I finally spent like 2 days and created this huge stone hollow in the brook in walking distance of my front door. So I could just submerge like Tupperware containers and jars. And I had a big flat rock that I could lay over it. And I was like, they're not going to get into that. And we had a rainstorm and a flash flood, and it all washed away. Oh. And that's when I went to my landlord, Theron and Iva Fisher, and said, I got to put electricity in. And it was to get the refrigerator. It also extended my drawing life, though, Noah, because then I could draw all night into the wee hours of the morning.
It must have been freezing in there in the winter.
That's what wood stoves are. Wood stoves are for that. And the wood stove would, cold winter night when it would get below zero. And we had a really brutal winter, my first winter there. There was almost no snow until February. So the frost layer really went deep into the ground. Some people's wells froze that winter. And I would get that wood stove going until parts of it were just glowing red. And you'd stoke up your wood stove at night before going to sleep, and the coals would keep burning over the evening, and by morning it was chilly in there. But no, it was pretty comfortable. I smelled awful the whole time I lived.
Yeah, because there must be an outhouse, right?
No, there was just an outhouse.
Yeah, outhouse. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was a very special outhouse, Noah.
What was special about it?
Well, it was a schoolhouse. So the outhouse, you didn't have to walk outdoors. There was like a wood partition out back. You'd walk down this long corridor, and at the end of it, there was a 4-hole shithouse there. And the Disney movie had just come out, The Black Hole, that science fiction movie, Black Hole. And from some local theater, I got this advertising thing for the black hole, and I kind of tacked it up on the wall. So the black hole was like pointing down toward one of the useful toilet holes. Yeah, that was living in Grafton.
But that would have been 100 years worth of shit in that thing.
No, you scraped it out every year. Whatever fantasy people have about outhouses, you got to rake them out or shovel them out on a regular basis. So, over the winter you couldn't do that, but every spring I had like this long-handled hoe. This is probably way more than anyone wants to know about outhouses. And then you'd hoe it out, and you'd try to spread it in the yard in the back, and that way it would dry out quickly and not smell. So.
What a weird existence you were living. This is how you were living, and then you'd go in and draw horror comics.
Yeah, exactly. And you wonder why I put flies on all my drawings, right? Come on.
So, do you remember how much the rent was for that place?
$60 a month.
And damn, that's great. What was the page rate you were getting at the time? Do you remember that?
Probably about $60 a page. But actually, it was great. Like it was inexpensive enough that I would travel to New York on the bus. I didn't have a car until late in the time I lived there. I just used a bicycle. So I would bus into New York, line up freelance work as much as I could, come back to Grafton, do the work. Luckily, starting in 1979, which is when I started living there, Federal Express began delivery and pickup in Vermont right that year.
Wow.
So between FedEx and the post office, and of course the post office was in downtown Grafton, I could mail or receive, whatever was necessary. And I would like stockpile work, get it done in Grafton, and then I could pay my rent like 2-3 months in advance. Yeah. And I would travel. And I ended up spending a lot of time in Santa Fe, New Mexico. That became like my second home for about a year. And that's where I met my first wife, because I certainly was not going to meet anybody in Grafton, Vermont. Trust me.
You didn't have a telephone, right? I mean, how did you call people?
A telephone. Yeah. You don't need electricity for a phone back then. They were dial-up, right? So a phone line was separate from your electric line. It's not like today where power out, no phone, So I had a phone. I had everything I needed except a shower.
So you would spend time in Santa Fe, New Mexico? I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. I probably lived there off and on for the equivalent of about a year. Year and a half spread over time. But I would go out and stay there as long as I could until my money ran out or was about to run out. And then I'd have to come back east. So I would go out and spend, 2-3 months at a time out in Santa Fe. I really loved it out there. Having grown up in Vermont, Noah, I mean, you spent time here in Vermont. You spend a year or more here. And it's kind of like living in a inverted fishbowl. Like you can always see the edge of the horizon you're on. Yeah. And with the tree line and everything, the sky is kind of a bowl over your head. Going out to Mexico, it was like I felt naked. Like it was just this raw, open space.
Oh, yeah.
I'll never forget, like one of my first nights out not in Santa Fe, but in a nearby tiny village called Cerrillos. We were up on the edge of a cliff, and we just sat for like 6 hours, and we watched this storm come in. this huge thunderstorm come in. And then it went over our heads. We got soaked. And then we sat there for the next 2 hours and watched it go the other direction. I'd never experienced anything like that growing up in New England, because in New England, you've always got this kind of, it's like we're in this big environmental womb here in New England. Yeah. Where out in New Mexico, it was wide open. I wasn't really gathering much at that time in my life. I know that's hard for you to believe, knowing now, Noah. Yeah. And how much I've amassed. But at that time, I was in a little one-room place. I would travel with a backpack, and if I was bringing work, an art portfolio, that was my world, a backpack and a folio. So I wasn't, when I was in New Mexico, I mainly just loved exploring out there. But it was it took me a while to get used to. Like, I had never been in a hostile environment in terms of, the life forms are dangerous around you. I stepped on a cactus once, and the spine went right through my sneaker and my foot, like, whoa, scorpions, rattlesnakes, that kind of thing. I remember a friend driving us way out, and then we parked and hiked, and we were in one of those canyon areas where there were all the cliff dwelling, caverns and so on there. And exploring that for an entire day. That was the biggest dose I got. I still have a number of friends out there. My friend Tim Varick, who went by the name Doc Ersatz when I knew him at Johnson State College. Tim lives out in Santa Fe, and he's always been into archaeology. And we stay in touch on Facebook, and he'll often post photos of pottery bits he's found recently and so on.
Do you ever get into fossil hunting or not?
When I was a kid, I grew up in Vermont. We don't have, there are no dinosaur fossils in Vermont. There was
fossil is a whale in Vermont.
Well, there was a skeleton of a whale that was found on the western side of the state, over on the other edge of the Green Mountains. And if you go up around North Hero, Vermont, there were some places we could walk around. You would just find fossilized shellfish, lying in the sand there. It's all sedimentary soil. And we used to find trilobite fossils in a couple of cliff faces that were on the edge of Lake Champlain. What you tend to find in the soil in Vermont might be Indian arrowheads, archaeological rather than paleontological finds. I was totally into fossils. If we'd had anything like what New Mexico has, I'd have, I would have filled many, many rooms with with fossils, because I was a total junkie for it. I only have a few now that I keep in my drawing studio. I've got a few fossils, including a couple of dinosaur teeth, but that's all I've really held on to. I used to have a lot of coprolites, but dino shit only goes so far in this world. So.
Yeah. We used to go, as kids, we used to go to Monmouth County in New Jersey. There's a stream.
Yeah.
Very fossil rich, and we would just have sieves. It was my favorite thing to do as a kid. We'd be sitting there all day shoveling in there, and we find I have so many of those squid, the squid point. I can't remember what they're called.
Cephalopod shells. Yeah. The only time I saw those growing up, Noah, would have been my folks used to take us down to the Albany and Schenectady part of New York State. And there were fossils around there. And I used to love going to the New York State Museum in Albany, New York. I'm too young to remember this, but my parents told me the story a number of times that when they first took me to that New York State Museum, they used to have 3 mounted mastodons in the main hall. 2 of them were skeletons, and one was like a replica mastodon. So it looked like a taxidermy specimen. And apparently when they walked into the room, I bolted and tried to climb up the man, the one that had the hair and everything on it. And the guard had to pull me down, and I didn't damage it, fortunately. But so most of the really cool fossils I saw as a kid would have been in museum setups. But that was also the time. I know it's changed a lot over the last 50 years. But when I was a kid, our local library, which would have been Waterbury, Vermont. I grew up in Duxbury, Vermont, so the closest library was in Waterbury across the Winooski River. And our local library had glass cases with fossils. They had a mummy.
Wow.
So I have no idea where it came from or anything, but at that, early 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s, a lot of local libraries, not just museums, but small town libraries would have artifacts like that. And I remember going up to the library. I went there every week because I was a book junkie. And, but I loved to go up to the little meeting room when the librarian would let us go up there and just look at the mummy. That was so cool.
Yeah,
I'm sure it's long gone because a lot of that stuff has to have been either repatriated or I don't know how do they deal with a mummy that they're not supposed to have? Who knows?
Yeah. Well, have you done any because you're friends with paleontologists, right? Like so.
Yeah. My friend Michael Ryan and I stay in touch. I really got into entering that world as best I could when I was working on Tyrant, and I joined the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology, and I used to go to their annual conferences, which I loved. I got to go to one in Seattle. It was either Portland or Seattle. I can't remember which city because whichever city it was in, I also visited the other city the same trip because it's rare that I got to go to the Northwest. I've been to their conferences in Chicago. And I got to meet a lot of paleontologists. And by the time I'd gotten up to what became Tyrant number 3 and 4, I was connected enough, primarily through the network that Dr. Michael Ryan put me in touch with, that if I was going to be drawing, like there's a turtle in the later issues of Tyrant, Michael put me in touch with, a couple turtle experts. I got to hold the fossilized shell of that animal.
Wow.
Basement of one of the museums we visited during one of the SVP conferences. So,
wow.
But pretty surreal world, Noah. I remember seeing 2 old paleontologists almost getting in a fist fight over Triceratops locomotion methods. Right? Competing theories of how Triceratops walked, and they would almost come to blows over it. So it was kind of surreal. It was also kind of funny because the paleontologists who were my age or younger totally got what I was trying to do with Tyrant. And the ones that were older than me, it was all they could do not to like pat my head or pinch my cheek, like, oh, a cartoonist, So there was a definite generational shift, but it was also this weird sort of camaraderie because a lot of the paleontologists I met had wanted to be cartoonists when they grew up. And I was a cartoonist, and I had wanted to be a paleontologist when I grew up. So we were, there were a lot of connections there.
Yeah, well, that was my generation, was all kids who wanted to be paleontologists because of the Jurassic Park movies.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, it just all of a sudden, for some reason, like in the early, maybe late 80s, early 90s, dinosaurs were just everywhere, and like, that was a really strong thing in my neighborhood, and my father just sent me like a file of all my childhood drawings that he had kept.
No kidding. Oh, yeah. You got to do a sketchbook of all that.
Yeah, I got to do something with them. And it's so weird seeing that stuff because you just can't believe, I was like a little 6-year-old kid and I'm drawing these big dinosaur drawings that are pretty great, And then I met Neil Vokes, who like this.
Oh yeah, I know Neil.
Yeah. And I have two drawings that I must have gotten from him at a convention when I was a little kid that my dad held on to, and he sent them back to me.
Oh, cool.
Like velociraptors and stuff. And I was like just super into dinosaurs, but like Jurassic Park definitely was a big part of that. I'm sure that,
See, my generation, I was born in 1955. We went through a big dinosaur boom when I was like 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. Yeah. And it was in all the comic books. I mean, my favorite comic books were Turok, Son of Stone, and Kona, Monica Monster Isle, Gold Key and Dell. The War That Time Forgot, those old Star-Spangled War stories. Yeah, I mean, that's the stuff I was buying off the newsstand for 10 cents and then 12 cents. It was right when the price shift happened. And dinosaurs were everywhere. A movie would hit like Dinosaurus, and this is before, movie companies other than Disney, they didn't put out toy lines and stuff when there was a new movie, but there'd be a Dell movie comic, that would come out of Dinosaurs, and that would get your appetite up for, I can't wait to see this movie, Gorgo, the Godzilla movies were playing in theaters back then. You know, it was a big dino boom. And I was from that generation of kids like Scott Shaw, the cartoonist Scott Shaw, where, you know, dinosaurs were everywhere. I had that Marx dinosaur plastic set that were all these plastic dinosaur figurines about yay big.
Yeah.
And it came with this flat plastic sheet of like a jungle floor, and it would come with like palm trees and fake plastic mountains and stuff. And yeah, dinosaurs were everywhere back then.
But I feel like they're still, like, if you go to like a Rite Aid and they have like a plastic bag full of little dinosaur figures, I feel like it's the same mold.
It is pretty much, yeah. And it's gotten shittier because like all the details have been worn off, or they've gone through so many iterations of the mold that, yeah, it pretty much is. It's kind of embarrassing, isn't it?
Yeah, it doesn't represent accurately. Like the iguanodon is still sitting there, like,
right. Tail on the ground, thumbs up.
Exactly. Thumbs up dinosaur.
Then you go to the nature stores or the science shops, and museum stores, and man, but they're way more expensive. But some of those dinosaur figures are like, holy shit, they're beautiful. Some of them
more accurate, you think?
Yeah, some of the museums have their own lines of dinosaurs, and they're more accurate as of the 1990s. But as you know, that's already outmoded. You know, good luck trying to find a plastic figurine of a feathered T-Rex. You know, you're not going to find it too easily. So
if you were doing Tyrant still, would you have had to be like kept up with the evolution? Yeah, like you would have all of a sudden Tyrant would have had feathers.
Well, Michael Ryan and I got together 3 summers ago. I drove out. I took a trip. This is when you could get in a car and drive to Canada, which we can't do right now, Noah. Borders closed, right? Yeah. But I 3 summers ago, I took a long road trip and I went up to Ottawa and spent about a week with Michael Ryan, and we rekindled spending time together. And also Michael got me into some of the fossil collections that the museums up there have retained. And Michael sent me home with 2 thumb drives that I'm still digesting of then current papers on how things had changed within paleontology. He steered me to 3 papers that pretty decisively lay out that adult T-Rexes would not have had feathers or any hair-like structures. But we've never found, you know, to this day, there still haven't been discoveries of a nest, a T-Rex nest or anything. So it's still all speculative what an infant T-Rex would have looked like. The science is changing so much, though. I mean, the last lecture that I got to enjoy at the level that I used to enjoy the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology conferences was a lecture that Michael got me into that Dr. Jack Horner presented. And Jack is one of the paleontologists who's always the consultant on the Jurassic World and Jurassic Park films. And Jack was showing a number of slides of ceratopsian skull formations. Those are the horned dinosaurs, Triceratops, Styracosaurs, and so on. And he put up like, I'm just guesstimating, he put out like 6 to 8 images of different, very elaborate, you know, ceratopsian skulls, the frills that they had. And he, you know, named them all. They were all species we'd known or heard of. And then he kind of merged the slides together, and he said that the current research, what they're able to do now in studying the morphology of the bone tissue and so on, that it appears that these might not have been all separate species, that an individual species of ceratopsian may have morphed its head shape during its lifespan in different ways and at different times. And in fact, the older specimens they had, the ones that were elderly ceratopsians, that morphologically malleable tissue that the skulls were formed of had become quite brittle, right? So they couldn't grow those elaborate horns and formations anymore. And his speculation is, you know, this may have been for courtship. There is no living current biological specimen out there of an animal that has a similar skull tissue, a similar tissue. The closest thing I think he said were the cassowary birds who grow those crests.
Yeah.
But he was saying, these were animals that could grow, and then the skull would reabsorb these elaborate growths.
Huh.
And he also made the argument, he put out the image, that classic image, the Charles R. Knight painting of the Triceratops and the Tyrannosaurus Rex facing off.
Yeah.
And he said, what would a Triceratops do if it actually successfully gored and killed a T-Rex? You've got like this multi-ton animal stuck on your head, It's not like you can scrape it off on the ground or something,
Yeah.
So his argument is that, we've had it all wrong with ceratopsians, that these were not defense mechanisms. These were probably courtship plumage. So, and that was like 3-4 years ago, Noah, maybe 4 years ago that I heard that talk. And the science has continued, the papers that have been written, the studies that have been done on fossils. I don't know how much you keep up on it. I try to keep up on it online. I mean, all the time they're finding new specimens, new species, more and more eggs and nests, which presents a whole different approach to the embryology. So it is my hope to get back to work on Tyrant. But right now I'm spending a lot of time reading current science texts, trying to reacquaint myself and really strip away a lot of those models I had in my head when I was working on Tyrant back in the mid-90s, because they're obsolete right now by and large. Noah.
There's a documentary you should watch called We Believe in Dinosaurs. Did you see that? It's about the Creation Museum in Kentucky.
I have seen that. And in fact, I wanted to go to that museum and nobody would go with me, Noah.
Oh, I would totally go.
Oh man, okay. All right. If the cloud lifts where we can go. Yeah, I don't even know if it's still open right now. I mean,
I think it's closed for the COVID.
Yeah. I really wanted to go when I was taking that summer trip 3 years ago. Nobody would go with me.
How funny would it be if, because 2020 is the year where all the disasters are happening, if America flooded and the only ones who survived were the people that were inside?
Yeah, there you go.
The Ark experience.
We're pretty well suited for this lifestyle. I don't know about you and Amy, but Marge and I are doing okay. It's like, I make my living by staying at home doing work, and so we feel fortunate in that regard. Yeah, when the flood comes, I'm on fairly high ground here. I don't know about you.
No. Yeah. So would you, like, if Abrams or something came and offered you money to do a graphic novel about tyrants, would you take that deal? Would you do it?
Nobody's ever paid me shit to do anything. Everything I've done, though, has been pretty much self-activated, self-published, or in the case of Swamp Thing, it's a page rate incrementally as you do the work. I shopped Tyrant around before I self-published it, and I could not find a home for it. Part of the problem back then is any publisher I would approach wanted it to be a science fiction story or a time travel. They wanted human characters, and I could not make it understood in a way that made market sense to the publishers of the 80s and early 90s. No, this is just an animal's life story. Now that's not so much the problem. Now one of the problems is there's so many other people doing this kind of work. It was pretty much Ricardo Delgado doing his series Age of Reptiles, and me. And then my good friend Jim Lawson did Paleo, and I actually collaborated with Jim on a couple of stories that I scripted and he drew. And now other people have picked up the baton and run. I mean, that's how it works in pop culture. You lay out your best work, you put it out there, and if it has any impact at all, there's going to be work like it that follows.
Like they were like, hey, we'll give you $30,000 to do a 250-page graphic novel that's just the life of a T-Rex.
I'd go for it. I mean, right now, part of what I'm doing is stripping away some of the Tyrant stories I had planned on doing, because I've since seen them done in documentaries like the British, show. There were ideas I had that were original in the early 90s that there have since been some version of done, not because of anybody seeing my notes, but just, you're going to tell a story about a prehistoric animal. That's the kind of narrative. But nobody's done anything like what I was planning with Tyrant. Tyrant does not have a good death, Noah. I will just leave that there. But yeah, I would love to do it.
Was it because of money or something? Why did you stop doing it?
Well, I stopped doing it because my kids were more important than my imaginary kid. You know, the whole comic book industry imploded in 1996 with the direct sale market implosion, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that, you know, Rick Veitch, myself, Colleen Durant, Jeff Smith, all of us who were self-publishing, it went from we had 14 distributors to we had one distributor in a matter of a year. It just folded up, you know, like somebody closing up an accordion and putting the clip on it and putting it in the closet. And it was no longer viable. My living was pretty comfortable in 1994, 95 when I was doing Tyrant, because with two large distributors, at that time it was Diamond and Capital, my check would pay the printing bill. My Capital City distributor check was all profit. Wow. And there were, you know, 11 other distributors that were incremental profit, but it meant that I could take care of, I mean, I was going through a separation and a divorce at that time, but I could prepay for 2 households' rent January of every year from my profits on Tyrant, wow. Right? And when the whole market imploded in 1996, that was no longer possible. Part of what happened back then, and we're seeing it happen now for very different reasons, is, you know, publishers and people who are on the higher end of the food chain than you and I are see the market as like a pie. And in the mid-90s, the distributors and the larger publishers, DC, Marvel, Image, Dark Horse, you know, the new ones hadn't sprung up yet. There was no IDW or Boom at that time. They all saw the pie as a finite configuration. Like, that's how big the market is. And they got it in their head in the mid-90s, like, okay, we can divide and own this pie, right? We'll squeeze out all the independents. We're just going to own this pie. And when the market forces that ended up imploding the direct sale market, meaning Marvel Comics going direct with a small distributor, Heroes World, prompting DC Comics to go direct only with Diamond, which destroyed all the other distributors, because if you're a comic book distributor and you can't carry Marvel or DC Comics, you're screwed. Yeah. What happened is the pie shrank. They didn't think it was going to shrink. They thought it was going to stay big, and they were going to end up with a bigger piece of the pie. And the whole pie shrank. And this is how much it shrank. Todd McFarlane with Spawn, right? Which was like one of the best-selling indie comics at that time, if you considered Image and independent, and they were at that time. Yeah. He was selling over 700,000 copies of each issue. And by the time the market shrinkage had concluded in 1997, 98, he was still in the same position in the sales charts. Yeah. He was selling 70,000 copies.
Oh, my God.
The market shrank. And we watched it happen incrementally. I'll never forget being at the Capital City Distributors' final trade show. And Paul Pope and I were sitting at the bar commiserating, you know, and I rarely drink, but we were drinking at that show because we could see this is done. This party is over. And retailers would come up while we were in the bar and talk to either Paul or I or both of us and thank us. And one of the retailers who had always carried Tyrant and been very supportive put his hand on my shoulder and said, well, I'm going home and closing the store, and I'm opening it up as a cigar shop next month. Like, they gave up. Once Capital was out of the game, they'd already tried to deal with Diamond in the past. They were done. And it also meant that a lot of the comic shops just evaporated over a period of 10 to 12 months. The market just shrank. Yeah. And it's happening now. COVID-19 is a factor, but everything that's been going on, I don't know if you follow the retailers' posts online. Okay. Yeah. I mean, look at what they're going through, and they're going through hell right now because suddenly, you know, DC is pulling stunts. Mm-hmm. Diamond 1 week is saying they're closed, and then what was it? 2 weeks ago, Steve Jeppy was like, "I'm back in charge," you know. Yep. And shipping costs alone are killing them. You know, just the change in the cost of shipping and who is suddenly responsible for the shipping costs. I don't know what's going to survive into next year. You'll still be doing comics. I'll still be doing drawing. I don't know what I'll be doing as of next year. I'm still figuring that out.
Yeah.
But it's going to be a very different retail environment that we're going to be in next year, Noah.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see. I mean, I think a lot of comic shops are going to close down a lot more. But the thing is, like, how many more can close down before it's not viable as a business anymore? You know,
it's the direct sale market has been an endangered, species now for 25 years.
Yeah.
And the fact that it never evolved past the point of those diamond catalog. I mean, what a crazy way to retail our work, right? Like the people who are fans of your work, by and large, if they're buying at a comic shop, they're supposed to decide 4 months before your work even exists, is in print, what they want, right? And they have to place their order. And then the retailer has to hope and pray that 4 months from that order, they're going to walk in the store and pick up their pre-order, right? I mean, that is just like, that has been the mode that the direct sale market has functioned at since the 1980s. It's late 80s, at least. It's crazy. It's crazy. So things have changed in many ways. You and I have had this conversation, or we're about to. The mainstream of comics is no longer DC, Marvel, Dark Horse. I mean, the mainstream of comics is Scholastic.
Yeah.
And their model is going to change, because if schools are not in session, the Scholastic Book Club, which has been one of their primary vehicles of nurturing and cultivating that incredible market that they have in graphic novels, is going to go through a revolutionary change. And whether that change is going to be an implosion, or whether that change is going to mean another way of getting their work into the hands of the current generation, who knows? I mean, my grandchildren, our son and daughter-in-law were just in a conference call with their local school that went on for 3 hours last night, where the schools are figuring out how it's going to work this fall.
Wow.
And that's going to impact how our work is sold, Noah, and that's certainly going to impact. Scholastic is the primary publisher of graphic novels as you and I speak right now,
Yeah.
And how is Raina's next book going to reach her readership? Those kids are going to find it, trust me. But it may not be through the Scholastic Book Fairs. It may not be through the Scholastic Book Club, or whatever the current mode is that they've been using. So yeah, it's hard to even say what comics is anymore. I mean, both you and I know what the media is. What we know when we're reading a comic, whatever it's called, it's like, yeah, this is a comic. But how it's going to be delivered, how it's going to be sold, how it's going to be retailed, all bets are off right now. And to me, that's not frightening. To me, that's like new windows of opportunity. New doors are going to open. I do want to get to the point of putting out a collected Tyrant or new Tyrant work. How am I going to sell it has been my primary question, because that it always comes back to what can I do. The mode of bankrolling creators that used to exist doesn't exist anymore. I mean, advances aren't even advances anymore when you negotiate them with publishers, right? Most advances used to be, you negotiated a contract, you signed the contract, you got half that money that you had agreed upon up front. And that was to help you pay your bills while you did the work. And a decade or more ago, a number of years ago, it shifted to advances. And I'm talking about the big publishers, Random House, Penguin. You agree on an advance, you sign the contract. If you're fortunate, you get a quarter of that up front. You get the next quarter when you have finished the work. And then you get the next quarter 6 months after the work was accepted. And you get the final quarter after your book is published. That's not an advance anymore. That means you're doing other work to subsidize finishing that project. We do our work for love, by and large. And it's not because we're stupid. It's because it's the only way the work gets done. Even in the glory days of graphic novels, it was only a handful of creators that were getting advances of $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, right? And it's very much a certain, I don't even want to call them elite, because a lot of times it's new creators that get the higher advances because the publishers are looking to cultivate a name, a creator, a brand.
Yeah.
But it's just how it works. It's how it's always worked. Howard Cruz, bless him. I mean, Howard passed away earlier this year, and he and I were friends since the 80s. Howard, like Art Spiegelman, had to go through all these different economic models to complete Stuck Rubber Baby, just as Art Spiegelman had to for Mouse. And it's not any easier for you, Noah. And I'm not looking at any sunshine route for Tyrant. You know, what's going to subsidize my being able to get to the drawing board now that I'm no longer teaching? The teaching is what subsidized any work that I did over the last 15 years. And I have published work out every year, right? A lot of it's work people in comics don't care about because I love writing about pop culture and movies and, you know, so on and so forth. But I've stayed very prolific and productive. But it's my teaching that subsidized that work. And as of next year, it'll be my retirement that subsidizes the work once I'm on Social Security.
Yeah.
If we still have Social Security, we'll see.
Yeah, exactly.
I remember having an argument with Dave Sim, and I know Dave Sim is not a name to mention these days, but you know, Dave was one of my mentors and a really important, liberating force in my life in terms of teaching me to carve out some autonomy as a cartoonist and to figure out how to make a living at it. Yeah. And Dave once said to me, you know, do you have a hard time just sitting down and drawing? And I said, well, sometimes it's lonely. And Dave got really Dave could get really aggressive and he goes, it's not lonely, it's alone, right? Like parsing out the word. And it's like, okay, it's alone time. But, you know, if you're a social creature,
yeah,
it can be lonely, you know, you feel isolated and so
yeah.
on. So
I have never read any Dave Sim comics, man. I never read Cerebus.
Well, it was great in its day. And I'm going to carve out time to reread it over the winter. Okay. But inevitably, I'm going to hit that block of when it became problematic for everybody that was reading Cerebus at the time. So,
what would you suggest is like a starting point for Cerebus? Not the very beginning, right?
Actually, the very beginning's great because Dave was playing when he started. When it starts, it's a parody comic. It's a parody of Barry Windsor Smith's Conan.
Oh, okay.
Conan, right? And you've read some of the Conan.
I have, yeah.
Yeah, so you'll enjoy it.
Okay,
and then the satire is what begins to propel it. And when the cast begins to grow in Cerebus, where it's Dave's parody of the Marx Brothers and Dave's parody of the Rolling Stones and what have you, you're the kind of person that'll go, oh, okay, I should listen to some Stones for a week, right?
Yeah.
So you get a sense of Mick and Keith and so on. I think I always try to approach work I'm revisiting or new work I've never read that's older work. Like I'm rereading Jules Verne right now because of my friend Tim Lucas. My friend Tim Lucas has become a real Jules Verneaholic, just devouring English language editions of Jules Verne. He gifted me one for Christmas or my birthday last year. And so I'm revisiting Verne. And I'm finding it useful to go back to the first couple of books I read when I was a kid. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and Journey to the Center of the Earth. So I'm a real believer in, well, go back to the beginning. They're all building blocks. So if you've never read Cerebus, start to start, you know. Because try to jump into the middle, you're going to get lost at some point. You're going to be like, who's this? You know, who's Jaka? I don't understand.
Yeah. Well, like Love and Rockets, I just tell people just dive in. Because if you start at the beginning of Love and Rockets, you're going to lose interest. It's a weird sci-fi thing.
Well, that's true. I mean, when Love and Rockets started, and you probably heard me give the spiel to a senior or two. I mean, Jaime and Gilbert and Mario at that time, they were just fucking around. You know, they just wanted to fill X number of pages every issue. And they gave themselves the absolute freedom to go in any direction their work took them. And you're right. I mean, Maggie and Hopi are introduced as characters in Mechanics.
Yeah.
Where, you know, Maggie's the one that goes out and repairs rocket ships in, I don't know, some South American or Central American area where there's dinosaurs. And that takes a back seat very quickly because Maggie, Hopi, Speed, you know, all those characters become more interesting to Jaime and more interesting to us. Mm-hmm. But that was the fun of reading Love and Rockets when it was coming out. It's like, wow, where are they going? You know, and then you did an issue where it was like they would have a one shot like Errata Stigmata or one of those characters. And it's like, whoa, where did that come from? You know? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I'm going to spend a lot of time revisiting a lot of that old work. I still have my boxes of Love and Rockets, and you know, I'm also spending a lot of time this summer and fall getting rid of a lot of the old comics in my basement.
Yeah. Do you use eBay to get rid of stuff?
No, I'm like Jason Lutz, who we mentioned earlier. Jason's son Max is suddenly into comics, so I'm just going to give Max a lot of my old comics because man, summer in Vermont with old comics. And especially when you're like COVID-19 and you're a kid, like comics were my lifeline when I was Max's age. So maybe he'll dig some of the stuff. I'm never going to reread Spawn 1 through 100. No, I don't need to revisit that. I've held on to it because it was in a box, but it's like, and there's a lot of people that love that work out there. I'll never forget when Chuck Forsman had graduated at CCS and he found out that Blair Starrett had left all these long white comic boxes in my CCS office. I didn't have an office when you came. I had an office the year before. And it was all this crap from Image and Valiant. Man, that was Chuck's go-to, right? Those are the comics he'd grown up with. So Chuck ended up taking, I think, all or most of them. So
yeah, that's cool. That was like
happy because he didn't have to worry about it. I was happy because it was out of my life. But I'm going to find new home for it. And then there's a lot of comics I'm going to hold on to. And I already worked out with the Billy Ireland Museum that my pre-code horror comics are going to go to them because of my career. They're interested in my horror comics collection because it's of a piece with the kind of work I've been doing in the comics field. So,
yeah, when I was kind of new to comics and figuring them all out, this guy in Denver told me to come to his apartment one day, and I went over there, and he had a long box of underground comics.
Oh yeah.
He just gave me because they were his father's. His father ran like a hippie newspaper in Denver in the 70s, and his father had recently passed away. So he said, "You can have my dad's comics." And I took him home, and there were Air Pirates were in there. It was amazing.
Yeah.
All the good stuff was in there, and it was just like immediately like, and I never shook that style. I still have this like underground style that it's like that's the stuff I was reading, you know.
It becomes formative, you know. For me, it was growing up with comics by Sam Glanzman, Joe Kubert, and once I was a teenager, it was out of all the undergrounds, it was Greg Irons that lit my fire, you know. Greg Irons' work, and when I look at that work now, it's a perfect continuity of three artists that were experts with brush and ink. So organically, I look at their work and I can see a through line. But in terms of content, they were light years apart from one another, you know?
Yeah.
But those are the comics I love. I still have all my undergrounds too, Noah. It was the undergrounds that made me want to draw comics, you know?
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? That the thing about comics is that there's so much different like variations of art styles that sometimes you're just not ready for. But then all of a sudden, like for example, this year I've been getting really into like Rick Griffith.
Rick Griffin.
Yeah, Griffin. Sorry, Griffin. Yeah. It's like, and that was all the stuff that I pass over, and when I was looking at Zap or whatever, I'd be like, oh, it's Rick Griffin. And I would just
Rick Griffin, Victor Moscoso. I mean, they were doing meta comics.
Incredible stuff.
Yeah.
You know.
And that's, I mean, that to me is part of the beauty of all art. You know, certain things speak to you at different times in your life, and things that didn't speak to you when you were younger, if they're still accessible to you, suddenly become a magic carpet to a whole different way of thinking about your own work and where you're going to go with it. You know?
Yeah, and same with like Harvey P. Carr, American Splendor. Like that's the kind of stuff you can just keep reading as you get older because you start to relate to it more and more. You know, like I'm reading it now, the early ones, and it's like he was like my age when he was like writing this stuff, and you see like where he was in his life, and it's so relatable. You know.
Have you held on to all those comics?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Me too.
This book is like there's so much comics history in this.
Yeah.
He goes through, he like tells the whole Al Columbia, Alan Moore story.
Yeah. And that's, you know, and Eddie's perspective was he was a real world traveler. Most of us were just holding up in our various little cubby holes of wherever we were living and drawing. And Eddie was traveling around. I'll never forget when we ran into each other in California. I think it was one of the only San Diego shows I ever went to. And Eddie ended up going from there to come stay with my first wife and my family and I in Vermont. And he had cut Bristol board into little index card size pieces of paper that he could carry in his pocket. And that's how he was drawing his comics, right? And then when he would get to a centralized location for a period of time, then he would organize them into pages.
Wow.
So he was like, he had streamlined his creative process to be a traveling cartoonist, right?
Yeah.
And that was really amazing. But I also remember, like, Eddie had his deadlines, so he'd come visit, and he would want you to work on whatever he was working on. And it's like, well, okay, but your deadline's not my deadline, and he would really take offense at that. Hey, it's hard to be a cartoonist at the age that Eddie and I are at and not be down on comics, you know? It's like he has seen so many permutations. Think about it. Eddie started when Paul Gravett had the fast fiction movement, right? So it was like photocopy comics is where Eddie started, doing those little fast fiction, the first Alex strips and so on. Eddie was one of the graphic novelists who was earning really solid advances at a certain point of time. But some of the work he's most remembered for is the work he feels the least association with, like From Hell. I'm the fucking guy that talked him into doing From Hell.
Oh, really?
He both curses me and thanks me at different times because, that was like a huge 12-year project that he never would have taken on. Like Jack the Ripper and horror comics, fuck that shit. That's not Eddie's cup of tea. But he saw it through.
He just released a colorized version of it.
Yeah, I'm fighting the urge to buy it. I'd love to see it. I'll probably see it at the Schultz Library when it's open again. So I'm too close to that work because I was seeing it when it was brand new. I was publishing it in Taboo. So
yeah, that's right.
And it's funny how even that has gotten sidelined. Because Alan Moore has pushed me out of his life. It's mentioned less and less that From Hell and Lost Girls were part of Taboo. It's like I'm part of the excised cancerous tissue of comics history.
Eddie is also not friends with Alan anymore, right? Are they still friends?
I hope they're still friends. I don't know. I'm not aware of a falling out or anything. So,
but it seems like a gift, like Alan kind of gifted you Swamp Thing in a way because he doesn't take any money, right, from the books, the reprints.
Yeah, I think that mainly goes to. That's a good question. I'm not sure where that goes. That may have increased our share, and if that's true, I'm very thankful. But it also may have gone to Rick Veitch, which I'm also thankful for because Rick did a lot of work on that book even before he was the official artist on the book. I don't know. Alan is really, Alan has not spoken to me in more years than we knew each other.
Yeah.
So, and I'm only being cautious in picking my words because I neither want to caricature nor vilify in any way. Because that was a great 10 years and we did some terrific work together. And Eddie was part of that during the period that I was editing, publishing, and co-publishing Taboo.
Yeah.
Eddie was also there for my most embarrassing Taboo moment.
What was that?
Well, Eddie was visiting us in Vermont and Taboo 2 had finally come back from the printer. So we arranged a signing at a Boston comic shop, which was in driving distance from where I was in Vermont. So Eddie and I pile into the car. We drive to Boston. We get to the shop. I forgot the fucking books. They were back in Vermont. Now, I don't know if you've ever done that, Noah, but you can relate well enough that. Eddie never forgot that, nor should he ever forget that.
Oh, shit.
That was my most embarrassing of many embarrassing moments in my Taboo years. I can still hear Eddie's accent where people would come up and they're like, "Wow, where's the Taboo?" And then he would go, "Bissette forgot the fucking book." And I had, and it was too late. It was a 2.5 hour drive. There was no graceful way to get him back down. I'm about to put a book out called Mr. Moore and Me, about those years working with Alan. And it's primarily reprinting, essays I had written and a couple of interviews that I had done with Alan. But
you're serious? You really are doing this?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it'll be out either the end of this summer or sometime over the fall.
Oh, awesome.
And it'll be a print-on-demand book called Mr. Moore and Me. And I've got some essays in there by other people as well. And I also collaborated with Rob Imes. Rob Imes is the editor of Ditko-mania, a fanzine dedicated to Steve Ditko. And out of everybody I've spoken to or corresponded with, Rob got the deepest into a conversation with me concerning the ethics of, like, what are the ethics involved when a creator does not want their work out there, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's what Alan's been publicly saying for years now. Yeah. And how does that impact the people you collaborated with, you know? Like, I want my work out there, and I have kids and grandkids that I want to see benefit from the work that I did in my lifetime still being in print. But Alan doesn't want the work out there, or doesn't want his name on it. And what are the ethical issues there? Now, I don't have answers, Noah, but in this book, there's two essays, one by myself and one by Rob Imes, where we kind of wrestle with that question. And we're dancing around Alan per se, because we talk about Steve Ditko, and we talk about, Rob also brings up some writers, noir fiction writers, crime fiction writers, who also had portions of their bodies of work that they were happy were out of print, that were coming back into print. Because it does raise a lot of ethical questions. I mean, part of my love of comics is all the ethical quandaries that we all wrestle with, you know. And you know, you do a lot of solo work, and that's your work. You have control of it. But you've also done a lot of collaborative work.
Oh, yeah.
And suddenly there's another whole, you know, each one of those collaborative pieces is like some kind of surrogate kid you sired that's out there in the world. And I still have all my original Alan Moore scripts, right? Because when I was doing Swamp Thing, Alan didn't want them back. DC didn't want them back. So I held on to them. Those are worth money now, but I've never sold one because I feel like ethically I shouldn't be making money, especially since Alan like exiled me from his life.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, other people say, you know, you don't owe him anything. It's been 25 years. Like, you held on to it. It's your property. Mm-hmm. I don't know. These are all, and I don't get upset over these kind of ethical issues. I like wrestling with that kind of stuff. Yeah. There's no answers really.
No.
You know, we're constantly, if you're creative, you're constantly sort of creating these surrogate children. And do you orphan them? Do you nurture them? Do you cut them loose? Do you hold them close? What do you do? You know?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, anyway, let's end there because it's
all right, man.
Taking a lot of your time, and I know your voice is going to start cutting out.
Yeah, this has been great. Yeah, my voice will drop off in about 10 minutes.